It was New Year's Eve, December 31st, 2023. My friend Jordan had asked me to house sit for the weekend while he and his girlfriend were out of town to celebrate the new year. Jordan's house was a cozy suburban two-story, and as a 34-year-old who didn't care much for the whole New Year's party scene, I didn't mind the quiet gig. He left on Saturday morning, giving me the rundown on feeding their dog, a cheerful golden retriever named Max, and keeping the house secure. The first day passed uneventfully. I spent most of it lounging on the couch, catching up on a backlog of TV shows and playing video games. As evening rolled in, I ordered some takeout and settled in with a movie, relishing the peace and quiet. Max snoozed happily at my feet, the epitome of canine contentment. It was around 9 p.m. when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and Jordan hadn't mentioned anyone stopping by. When I opened the door, a woman stood there. She looked to be in her mid-30s, dressed in a heavy black coat and holding a small duffel bag. "Hi," she said, her voice cheerful but slightly shaky. "I'm Tessa. I'm a friend of Jordan's. He said I could pick up something I left here a while back." I hesitated. I'd never heard Jordan mention a Tessa. She must have noticed my pause because she quickly added, "It's just a jacket I left in his room. It'll only take a second." I decided not to be rude. "Sure," I said, stepping aside. "His room's upstairs, last door on the left." Tessa smiled and stepped inside. She moved quickly up the stairs, her boots making soft thuds against the carpet. I returned to the couch but kept an ear out. Max seemed on edge, his ears perked up and his tail stiff. I tried to reassure him, but his unease was contagious. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I was just about to call up the stairs when she came down, now wearing a thick scarf and holding her bag. "Thanks so much," she said with another smile, then walked out the door before I could respond. Something about the encounter nagged at me, so I texted Jordan. "Hey, Tessa stopped by to grab a jacket from your room. Hope that's cool." His reply was almost instant. "Who the hell is Tessa?" I froze. I reread his message, my pulse quickening. I explained what had happened, but Jordan was insistent that he didn't know anyone by that name. His tone turned frantic. "You need to check my room. Now." I rushed upstairs and flipped on the light. Everything seemed in place. His dresser drawers were closed, the closet was shut, and the bed looked untouched. Still, Jordan demanded I check specific items. His watches were still in their box, and his safe was untouched. Nothing seemed to be missing. But then I noticed something chilling. The window in his room, which I was sure had been shut earlier, was slightly ajar. I locked it immediately and told Jordan, who went silent for a moment before saying, "She's lying. Don't let her back in. Call the cops if she shows up again." The rest of the evening was tense. I locked all the doors and kept Max close. Around 11:30 p.m., just as I was starting to relax, Max began growling at the front door. A soft, deliberate knock followed. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't answer. The knock came again, this time louder. Then, a voice called out, "Jordan? You there?" It was Tessa. I backed away from the door, texting Jordan in a panic. "She's back. What do I do?" He called me immediately. "Don't open the door. I'm calling the cops. Just stay quiet." The knocking stopped, but Max's growls grew more intense. I peeked through the peephole and saw not just Tessa but a man standing beside her, his face obscured by a hood. They were whispering to each other, glancing around nervously. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, flashing blue and red lights illuminated the front yard. The pair bolted, disappearing into the night. The police arrived and searched the area but found no sign of them. Jordan came back the next day, visibly shaken. He told me the lock on his room's window had been broken before, and he had meant to fix it. Whoever Tessa was, she wasn't working alone, and whatever they were after, it wasn't just a jacket. I stayed at Jordan's house for the rest of the weekend but couldn't shake the unease. Every creak of the house felt sinister, every shadow a threat. On New Year's Day, as I prepared to leave, I noticed something chilling. A folded piece of paper had been slipped under the front door. It read, "We'll be back. I handed it to the police, but there wasn't much they could do without leads. Since then, I found myself double-checking locks and peering out windows on New Year's Eve, haunted by the shadow of Tessa and her mysterious accomplice. Their intentions remain a chilling mystery, one I hope never to revisit. It was December 31st, 2023, and I was heading to a New Year's Eve party at my cousin Amanda's house in rural Montana. Amanda loved throwing these parties. Her house, nestled deep in the woods, was the perfect setting for a festive celebration. Cozy, warm, and big enough to host her extended circle of friends and family. I arrived early to help set up, stringing fairy lights along the porch and setting up a buffet in the dining room. Amanda had gone all out as usual. There was a roaring fire in the stone fireplace, a playlist of upbeat tunes playing softly in the background, and the scent of freshly baked cinnamon rolls wafting from the kitchen. Promised to be a good night. The first guests arrived around 8 p.m., and by 10 o'clock, the house was bustling with laughter, music, and clinking glasses. I was catching up with Amanda and a few of her neighbors when one of them, an older man named Dale, mentioned something that sent a chill down my spine. "Y'all remember the lights?" he asked, his voice low and serious. Amanda rolled her eyes. "Oh, Dale, not this again." "What lights?" I asked, curious. Dale leaned in, his weathered face illuminated by the firelight. "Out here, around this time of year, some folks have seen strange lights in the woods, always around New Year's Eve." I laughed nervously. "Like UFOs?" He nodded solemnly. "Call 'em what you want. I've seen 'em twice. Bright orbs, floating between the trees. And people who go looking for 'em don't come back." Amanda swatted him playfully. "You're just trying to scare my cousin. Don't listen to him." But something about Dale's tone unsettled me. He seemed genuinely concerned. I pushed it to the back of my mind and focused on enjoying the party. Midnight came and went in a flurry of cheers, champagne, and fireworks. By 12:30 a.m., people started trickling out. By 1 a.m., only a handful of us were left. Amanda, her boyfriend Mark, Dale, and me. Mark suggested we take a quick walk outside to get some fresh air before calling it a night. Dale immediately objected, muttering something about not tempting fate. But Amanda rolled her eyes again, grabbed her coat, and dragged Mark and me outside. Dale reluctantly followed, his flashlight in hand. The woods were eerily quiet, the kind of stillness that made every crunch of snow underfoot sound deafening. The stars were bright overhead, but the towering pines cast long, dark shadows. We didn't wander far, just a short loop around the property. I was starting to feel silly for being spooked earlier when Amanda stopped abruptly. "Do you see that?" she whispered. We all turned to where she was pointing. At first, I thought it was a trick of the moonlight, but no, it was a glowing orb of light, hovering silently about 30 feet away. It was pale and faint, but unmistakably there. Mark laughed nervously. "Well, that's creepy," Dale hissed. "We need to go back. Now." Before anyone could argue, another light appeared. This one was brighter, closer. Then another and another. They seemed to multiply, surrounding us in an almost deliberate pattern. My heart was pounding in my chest as I instinctively backed closer to Amanda. Mark, always the skeptic, decided to approach one of the lights. "It's probably some kind of drone," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "or a trick of the atmosphere." "Mark, don't," Amanda pleaded, grabbing his arm. But Mark pulled away and took a few steps toward the nearest orb. That's when the lights began to move. They darted back and forth, impossibly fast, weaving between the trees like they were alive. Mark froze, his bravado melting away as the lights closed in. "Run!" Dale shouted, snapping me out of my daze. We bolted back toward the house, slipping and stumbling on the icy ground. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel the lights following us, their glow casting eerie shadows all around. Amanda tripped, and I grabbed her arm, pulling her to her feet as we scrambled up the porch steps. We burst into the house, slamming the door behind us and locking it. The four of us stood there, panting and wide-eyed, listening for any sign of pursuit. But all we heard was silence. Mark tried to rationalize what we'd seen, but his voice was unconvincing. Amanda was shaking, tears streaming down her face. Dale was the only one who seemed calm, though his jaw was clenched tight. "They won't come in," he said quietly. "But you were fools to go out there." We stayed up the rest of the night, too scared to sleep. By morning, the lights were gone, leaving no trace of their presence. We searched the woods in daylight, hoping to find some explanation. A prank, a natural phenomenon, but there was nothing. Dale warned Amanda to be careful in the future, and she promised she would. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the lights weren't done with us. As I drove home later that day, I couldn't stop glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see one of those glowing orbs following me. To this day, I don't know what we encountered that night, but every New Year's Eve, I think of those lights in the woods and the way they seem to watch us, intelligent and malevolent. I haven't been back to Amanda's since, and I don't think I ever will. December 31st, 2023, was shaping up to be a quiet New Year's Eve for me. I had no big plans, just a solo night at my family's cabin in the Adirondacks. It was an old place, built by my grandfather in the 1950s, nestled deep in the woods with no neighbors for miles. My parents used it more often in the summer, but I liked the solitude it offered in the winter. I arrived at the cabin late in the afternoon, just as the sun was setting behind the snow-covered trees. The air was crisp, the ground blanketed in a fresh layer of snow that sparkled in the fading light. Felt peaceful, even magical. I lit a fire in the stone fireplace, made myself a cup of coffee, and settled in with a book, the perfect way to ring in the new year. By 8 p.m., the wind had picked up, howling through the trees and rattling the windows. I put the book down and turned on the radio, tuning it to a station playing classic rock. The familiar tunes filled the cabin, drowning out the unsettling sounds of the wind. I started to feel more at ease. That's when I heard it. A soft knock at the front door. I froze, my heart racing. Nobody should have been out there. Not in this weather and certainly not this far off the beaten path. The knock came again, louder this time. I grabbed a flashlight and approached the door cautiously, peering through the small frosted window. A man stood on the porch, bundled up in a heavy coat and scarf, his face partially obscured by a hood. He waved, his movements slow and deliberate, as if trying not to startle me. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door and cracked it open. "Sorry to bother you," he said, his breath visible in the freezing air. "My car broke down a few miles back. My phone's dead, and I was hoping I could use yours to call for help." I hesitated. He didn't look particularly threatening, but something about the situation felt off. Still, I couldn't just leave him out in the cold. I stepped aside and let him in. The man thanked me and removed his gloves, revealing hands that were red and raw from the cold. I handed him my cell phone, and he dialed a number, holding the phone to his ear. But after a few seconds, he frowned and handed it back. "No signal," he said, shaking his head. "Do you have a landline?" "We don't," I replied. "The nearest town is about 20 miles away. I can drive you there if you want." He hesitated, then nodded. "That'd be great. Thanks." I grabbed my coat and keys, and we stepped outside into the biting wind. My truck was parked around the side of the cabin, partially covered in snow. As I cleared it off, I noticed the man standing perfectly still, staring at the cabin. "You okay?" I asked, my voice tinged with unease. "Yeah," he said quickly, snapping out of whatever trance he'd been in. "Just thought I saw something." We got into the truck and started the long drive into town. The man didn't talk much, answering my questions with short, clipped responses. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me, even when I wasn't looking at him. About halfway to town, the truck's headlights illuminated something on the side of the road, what looked like a car, partially buried in snow. The man perked up. "That's my car," he exclaimed. I pulled over and we got out to investigate. The car was indeed his, a beat-up sedan with frost-covered windows. The hood was popped open, and the engine looked like it had been tampered with, wires pulled loose, components missing. It didn't seem like something that could have happened naturally. "Looks like someone messed with it," I said, my breath forming clouds in the freezing air. The man didn't respond. When I turned to look at him, his expression was unreadable, his eyes fixed on the car. A sudden chill ran down my spine, and it had nothing to do with the weather. "We should keep going," I said, trying to sound calm. He nodded, and we got back in the truck. The rest of the drive was tense, the silence between us heavy and oppressive. When we finally reached the town, I dropped him off at a gas station and watched as he went inside. I didn't stick around. I just wanted to get back to the cabin and put the whole thing behind me. But as I drove back, something didn't sit right. The man's behavior, the state of his car, it all felt wrong. When I got back to the cabin, I locked the doors and windows, double-checking every latch. I tried to convince myself that I was overthinking it, that the man was just a stranded traveler with a bit of bad luck. Then I noticed something on the floor by the fireplace. A pair of gloves. His gloves. I stared at them, my heart pounding. He hadn't been wearing them when I dropped him off, which meant, before I could finish the thought, I heard a soft knock at the door. My blood turned to ice. I didn't move, didn't even breathe, as the knock came again, louder this time. The gloves were still on the floor, and I knew somehow that he hadn't gone far.